During a blizzard, a lonely rancher finds 8 abandoned bear cubs. What happens next is astonishing. The bitter Montana wind howled through the gaps in John Malone's weathered barn, a sound he'd grown accustomed to over 15 years of solitary ranching. At 58, his face bore the marks of countless winters, each line telling a story of struggle and survival in the unforgiving landscape he called home. The February blizzard that had descended upon the Bitterroot Valley was among the worst he'd seen, transforming his familiar world into an alien landscape of swirling white. John pulled his wool collar higher against the cold as he made his final evening rounds, checking on his small herd of cattle. The animals huddled together in the relative warmth of the barn, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. His boots crunched through the fresh powder, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness like a knife. Just another night, he muttered to himself, a habit born of too many years alone. Since Sarah's passing 5 years ago, conversations had become rare visitors to Thunder Creek Ranch, much like the people themselves. The closest neighbor was 12 miles away, and visits to town were monthly affairs at best, especially during the harsh winter months. The wind carried a sound that didn't belong, a high-pitched whimper that cut through the storm's howl. John paused, tilting his head to listen. There it was again, closer to a cry this time, coming from the direction of Miller's Creek. His first thought was coyotes, but this sound carried a different note of desperation. Common sense told him to return to the warmth of his house. The temperature was well below zero, and the storm was worsening by the minute. But something in that cry tugged at a part of him he thought had frozen over years ago, along with his dreams of the family he and Sarah never had. "Damn it all," he grumbled, turning toward the creek. The snow was nearly knee-deep, and each step was a battle against the wind. The cry came again, stronger now, multiplied. John's flashlight beam danced across the snow-laden branches of pine trees, catching crystalline formations that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. The creek bed lay 20 feet below, accessible by a steep embankment that summer hikers sometimes used. In winter, it was treacherous. John carefully picked his way down, using exposed roots and rocks as anchors. The cries grew louder, carrying a distinctive note he now recognized: bears. Young ones. His heart rate quickened. Where there were cubs, a mother bear wouldn't be far behind. And even in winter, disturbing a black bear family was asking for trouble. But as he reached the bottom of the embankment, the beam of his flashlight revealed a scene that stopped him cold. In a shallow cave formed by fallen logs and overhanging rock, 8 tiny forms huddled together, their dark fur dusted with snow. Bear cubs, no more than a few weeks old, so young their eyes were barely open. They squirmed weakly, their cries growing fainter in the bitter cold. John swept the flashlight in a wide arc, searching for signs of the mother bear. The snow told the story. A single set of adult tracks led away from the den, already half filled by fresh snow. She hadn't returned in hours, maybe longer. Mountain lions had been spotted in the area recently, and hunting was still legal in some parts of the county. The implications made his stomach turn. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, watching one of the cubs attempt to stand on wobbling legs before collapsing back into the pile of its siblings. They wouldn't survive another hour in this cold, let alone the night. The decision he made in the next moment would change not only his life but the lives of countless others, though he couldn't have known it then. With movements born of years handling newborn calves, John shrugged off his heavy coat and carefully, one by one, lifted the cubs into its warm interior. They were surprisingly light, their bodies cool to the touch. The journey back to the house was a blur of burning lungs and aching muscles. Each step was a prayer that the cubs would survive, that he wasn't too late. The old farmhouse emerged from the swirling snow like a lighthouse, its windows glowing with promised warmth. Inside, John's hands shook as he laid his precious cargo on the kitchen floor. The cubs, bundled in his coat, had grown quiet, dangerously so. The nearest veterinarian was in Hamilton, 40 miles away, and impossible to reach in this weather. Whatever happened next would depend entirely on him. Years of handling livestock kicked in. He knew the signs of hypothermia, knew that warming them too quickly could be as dangerous as the cold itself. Working methodically, John gathered every blanket and towel he could find, creating a nest in front of the wood stove. He warmed milk on the stove, adding honey for energy, and began the painstaking process of feeding each cub with a turkey baster, the only tool he could find that might work. "Come on, little ones," he urged, cradling the smallest cub as it weakly accepted the warm milk. "Your mama wouldn't want you giving up now." Through the night, John kept his vigil. He fed them every 2 hours, maintained the fire at a steady warmth, and monitored each cub's breathing and temperature. By dawn, all 8 cubs were showing signs of improvement, moving more, crying stronger, even playing with each other in brief bursts of energy. As the storm raged outside, John found himself talking to them, sharing stories he hadn't told in years. He told them about Sarah, about the children they'd hoped for, about the dreams that had slowly withered in the face of reality. The cubs listened with what he could have sworn was attention, their dark eyes following his movements as he paced the worn floorboards. "You fellas need names," he declared during one feeding session. "Can't keep calling you cubs forever." And so they became. Thunder, the largest and most vocal. Grace, the gentle female who loved belly rubs. Scout, the curious one always exploring. Hope, the smallest but most determined. Faith, who never left Hope's side. Chance, the troublemaker. Spirit, the peacemaker. And finally Miracle, who had been the weakest but now showed the most fight. By the third day, the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white. The cubs were stronger, playing with increasing vigor and developing distinct personalities. John knew he needed help. These were wild animals, after all, and his knowledge of bear care was limited to what he could find in his ancient set of encyclopedias. The decision to call for help wasn't easy. He knew what most people would say. Wild animals belong in the wild. Nature should take its course. He was foolish to interfere. But looking at the cubs, now sleeping in a pile of blankets, their bellies full and their bodies warm, he couldn't bring himself to regret his choice. The call to the Montana Wildlife Center connected him to Dr. Emily Carter, a wildlife biologist specializing in black bears. Her voice carried authority tempered with kindness, and she listened to his story without judgment. "Mr. Malone, what you've done is extraordinary," she said after he finished. "Those cubs wouldn't have survived without your intervention. I'd like to come assess them, if you're willing. We need to ensure they maintain their wild instincts while getting the care they need." Emily arrived the next day, her 4-wheel drive truck carrying supplies and equipment. She was younger than John expected, maybe in her mid-30s, with keen eyes and a practical manner that put him at ease. Her British accent surprised him, and she explained she'd come to Montana 5 years ago for what was supposed to be a temporary research project. "The mountains have a way of keeping you," she said, smiling as she examined the cubs. "Rather like these little ones have kept you, I suspect." The cubs had doubled in size in just a week, their fur becoming glossy with good nutrition. Emily's examination confirmed they were healthy and developing normally, though she shared John's concerns about their mother. "Black bears are excellent mothers," she explained, watching Thunder and Chance wrestle over a toy John had fashioned from rope. "They don't abandon their cubs without serious cause. Given the tracks you described and the recent mountain lion activity, well, we have to assume the worst." The news hit John harder than he expected. He'd known, of course, but hearing it confirmed made the cubs' situation more real, and his responsibility to them more profound. Emily's expertise proved invaluable. She helped John set up a proper feeding schedule, showed him how to prepare formula specifically designed for bear cubs, and most importantly, helped him understand how to care for them without compromising their wild nature. "The goal is to keep them healthy and wild," she emphasized. "They need to maintain their natural instincts if they're going to survive once they're released." The mention of release sent an unexpected pang through John's chest. He'd known from the start this was temporary, but the cubs had filled a void in his life he hadn't fully acknowledged. The house felt alive again, filled with purpose and the kind of chaos he'd missed since Sarah's passing. Emily must have noticed his expression. "It's months away," she assured him. "They'll need care through the summer at least, and you won't be doing this alone anymore." True to her word, Emily began making regular visits to Thunder Creek Ranch. She brought supplies, monitored the cubs' development, and helped John modify his barn to create a secure outdoor enclosure where the cubs could learn to climb and play safely. As winter gave way to spring, the cubs grew rapidly. Their personalities became more distinct, their play more boisterous. John found himself looking forward to Emily's visits, not just for her expertise, but for the conversations they shared over coffee after the cubs' evening feeding. Word of the rescue spread, first locally, then beyond. A reporter from the Ravalli Republic wrote a story that was picked up by national news outlets. Soon, John's quiet ranch became the focus of unexpected attention. Wildlife photographers requested permission to document the cubs' progress. School groups wrote letters asking to visit. Conservation organizations reached out offering support and resources. Emily helped him navigate the sudden publicity, ensuring the cubs' welfare remained the priority. Together, they developed educational programs that allowed limited, controlled visits. Children learned about black bear conservation, the importance of preserving wild spaces, and the delicate balance between helping wildlife and maintaining their natural behaviors. The cubs became ambassadors for their species, their story touching hearts across the country. But more than that, they became a bridge between John's solitary world and a community he'd gradually withdrawn from after Sarah's death. Neighbors who hadn't visited in years brought supplies and stayed to help with the cubs' care. Local businesses donated materials for the expanding enclosure. A group of high school students volunteered to help build additional climbing structures under Emily's guidance. Through it all, John watched his charges grow stronger and more independent. They learned to forage for berries in their enclosure, to fish in the small pond Emily helped design, to climb and play with increasing skill. Each milestone was both a triumph and a reminder that their time with him was temporary. Summer brought new challenges. The cubs, now substantial in size, required more space and more complex enrichment activities. Emily's visits became more frequent as they worked to prepare the cubs for their eventual release. "They're doing beautifully," she assured John one evening as they watched the cubs splash in their pond. "Their instincts are strong, and they're showing all the right behaviors for their age." John nodded, trying to focus on the success rather than the approaching farewell. "When do you think they'll be ready?" "Early fall would be ideal," Emily replied gently. "They'll have time to establish territories and prepare for hibernation. We'll release them in pairs, in different locations to prevent competition." The preparation for release became a community effort. Local wildlife officials helped scout suitable release sites in remote areas with adequate food sources and natural denning opportunities. Tracking collars were fitted to monitor the cubs' progress and survival rates. As the release dates approached, John found himself spending more time with the cubs, memorizing their personalities and behaviors. Thunder, still the leader, always watching over his siblings. Grace, gentle but confident, teaching the others to fish with surprising skill. Scout, whose curiosity had only grown stronger. Hope and faith, inseparable as ever. Chance, whose mischievous nature had earned him countless adventures. Spirit, the mediator of squabbles. And Miracle, who had grown from the weakest to perhaps the strongest of all. The first release day dawned clear and cool. Thunder and Grace would be the first pair, transported to a remote area in the Bitterroot National Forest. John helped load them into the specially designed transport cages, his movements steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Emily stood beside him as the cubs were driven away, her presence a silent support. "They're ready," she said softly. "You've given them everything they need to succeed." Over the next 2 weeks, the remaining cubs were released in pairs, each departure both a heartbreak and a triumph. The last pair, Hope and Faith, seemed to understand the significance of the moment, pressing against the cage bars to touch John's hand one final time. The house felt impossibly quiet that night. John sat in his familiar chair, the one that had served as his observation post through countless feeding sessions and play periods. Emily had stayed, knowing he shouldn't be alone. "I've been thinking," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The educational programs we developed, there's no reason they have to end. The community engagement, the school visits, the conservation awareness, it could continue, perhaps even grow." John looked up, catching the enthusiasm in her eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "A partnership," The Montana Wildlife Center is looking to establish a satellite facility focused on black bear rehabilitation and education. Your ranch, with some modifications, would be perfect. You already have the experience, the community support, and the perfect location. The idea took root, growing stronger as they discussed the possibilities. By spring of the following year, Thunder Creek Ranch had transformed into the Thunder Creek Wildlife Education Center, specializing in black bear rehabilitation and conservation education. The tracking collars provided regular updates on the cubs' progress. All 8 survived their first winter, establishing territories and adapting well to life in the wild. Trail cameras occasionally caught glimpses of them, strong and healthy, living the lives they were meant to live. 2 years after the blizzard that changed everything, John stood before a group of elementary school students, sharing the story of 8 tiny cubs and one stormy night. Emily, now his wife and partner in both life and work, added scientific context to his practical experience. Together, they had created something neither had imagined possible, a place where compassion and conservation worked hand in hand. That evening, as they walked the property that had once felt too empty, John heard a familiar sound carried in the wind, the cry of bear cubs. In one of the rehabilitation enclosures, 3 new orphan cubs were beginning their journey toward a wild future, surrounded by the same care and dedication that had saved 8 lives on a bitter winter night. "Listen to that," Emily said, squeezing his hand. "Sounds like hope, doesn't it?" John smiled, thinking of 8 special bears out there in the wilderness, living proof that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come from simply refusing to walk away. "Sounds like family," he replied, and together they walked toward the sound of new beginnings. The story of John Malone and his 8 bear cubs continues to inspire people around the world, a reminder that compassion knows no boundaries and that even in our darkest moments, hope can arrive in the most unexpected forms. The Thunder Creek Wildlife Education Center stands as a testament to the power of one person's choice to make a difference, and to the extraordinary connections that can form between humans and the wild creatures we share our world with. In the years that followed, thousands of visitors would come to learn about black bear conservation, but more importantly, they would learn about the transformative power of kindness, the strength of community, and the endless possibilities that arise when we open our hearts to the unexpected miracles that sometimes arrive in the middle of a storm.